My dad called the second I clocked out, his voice flat like he was ordering room service. 30 people are coming. You handle it. Make it perfect. I said yes, like always, then went home and packed a bag. But what froze the family wasn't my disappearance. It was what I left behind. Proving that for years, their perfect holiday had been fully sponsored by my silence. My name is Lucy Howard, and if you asked me to describe the sensation of my soul leaving my body, I would point to that precise moment in the parking lot of the Riverton Care Alliance. It was the kind of Tuesday that felt personal in its cruelty. The first real freeze of the season had descended upon Lake Briar, Michigan, turning the asphalt into a treacherous sheet of black ice that reflected the sickly yellow sodium vapor lights overhead. The wind coming off the lake was not just cold, it was aggressive, slapping against my cheeks with a wet, stinging heaviness that made my eyes water. I had just finished a 10-hour shift in hospital administration, dealing with insurance claim rejections and the quiet, desperate anger of families who could not understand why their coverage had been denied. My brain felt like it had been run through a paper shredder. All I wanted was to get into my Honda Civic, blast the heater until my fingers thawed, and drive to my apartment where silence was the only guest I had invited for dinner. Then my phone vibrated against my thigh. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I pulled it out of my coat pocket anyway. The screen illuminated the dark, swirling snow. Dad. There were no emojis next to the name, no smiley faces, no hearts, no pictures of us fishing or grilling, just those 3 capital letters, stark and demanding. In that split second, the 34-year-old woman standing in the slush vanished. I was 7 years old again, freezing in the hallway because I had dropped a plate, waiting for the lecture that would explain exactly how I had failed to be careful. My stomach tightened into a knot so hard it felt like a physical blow. My shoulders hiked up toward my ears. It is amazing how the body remembers trauma even when the mind tries to rationalize it as just family dynamics. I slid the icon over to answer. I did not say hello. I knew the rhythm of this conversation before it started. Lucy, my father said. It was not a greeting. It was an activation code. Glenn Howard did not ask if I was tired. He did not ask how my day was. He spoke with the crisp, detached efficiency of a man booking a conference room, or perhaps ordering a complex coffee from a barista he did not plan to tip. Christmas is at the house this year, he announced. The static on the line crackled, but his voice cut through it like a knife. I have confirmed the list. 30 people will be coming. You need to handle it, and Lucy, it has to be perfect. I stood there, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and stared at a dent in the door of the car parked next to mine. 30 people. Last year it had been 20. The year before that, 15. The number grew like a tumor, unchecked and aggressive, and yet the infrastructure to support it remained exactly the same size. 30, I repeated, my voice sounding thin and brittle in the cold air. The lanes are coming down, Glenn continued, ignoring my tone completely. And your Aunt Janice invited the cousins from Ohio. It's a reunion. It needs to be upscale. Lucy, none of that paper plate nonsense from the 4th of July barbecue. I want the table to look like a magazine. You know what I mean. Real linens. Crystal. And for the main, we are doing prime rib. Get the good cuts from that butcher in the city. The one you went to for Marissa's anniversary party. And we need a wine pairing. Nothing from the grocery store. He paused, but not to listen. He paused to let the instructions settle, like concrete pouring into a mold. Make sure the house is ready by the 23rd, he added. I don't want people walking in and seeing dust on the baseboards like last time. There was so much wrong with that sentence. There had been no dust on the baseboards last time. I had spent 6 hours on my hands and knees scrubbing those baseboards because he had mentioned that the sunlight hit them in the afternoon, but logic had no place here. Facts were irrelevant in the face of Glenn Howard's narrative. I opened my mouth to speak. The words were there, burning in my throat. No, that was the word. It was short, simple, and complete. No, Dad. I am tired. I have a job. I cannot feed 30 people on a single salary. I cannot be the maid, the chef, and the punching bag for your ego. But as the freezing wind bit into my skin, the old script began to play in my head, louder than my own thoughts. If I said no, I knew exactly what would happen. He would sigh, that long, disappointed exhale that sounded like a tire losing air. He would call Aunt Janice. Within an hour, my phone would blow up with texts. Why are you being so difficult? Why do you have to be so selfish? It is just one meal. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? You are ruining the holiday spirit. I was trapped. The cage was not made of iron bars. It was built from the fear of being the villain in their story. I was terrified of the guilt they could manufacture and ship to my doorstep with free delivery. So, I did what I always did. I swallowed the bile. I let the cold seep into my bones and numb the outrage. Okay, I said. I will take care of it. Good, Glenn said. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say he appreciated it. He just pivoted to the next logistical point. Oh, and make sure you get the driveway cleared before everyone arrives. I don't want anyone slipping. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stared at the black screen. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. A siren wailed in the distance, heading toward the emergency room entrance. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was not a cinematic scream into the void. It was quieter than that. It felt like a single, taut thread, one that had been holding a heavy tapestry together for decades, had simply given up. It frayed and parted. The tension that had defined my relationship with my father, the constant, desperate need to please him, to buy his affection with labor and perfection, suddenly went slack. I got into my car. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I started the engine and drove out of the lot. Merging onto the highway that led toward my apartment, the heater blasted hot air against my frozen feet, but I couldn't feel it. I drove on autopilot, my eyes fixed on the red taillights of the car in front of me. 30 people, upscale, prime rib, magazine quality. I did the math in my head as I drove. The meat alone would cost $600. The wine would be another $400 if I followed his no grocery store rule. The decorations, the linens, the fresh flowers he would inevitably demand at the last minute, because the ones I bought weren't festive enough. We were looking at $2,000. $2,000 of my money, my savings, money I had set aside to fix the transmission on my car, or maybe, just maybe, take a vacation where I didn't have to clean up after anyone. Glenn wouldn't offer a dime, if I asked. He would wave his hand and say, "Don't make everything about money, Lucy. It's so unbecoming." I pulled into the carport of my apartment complex. It was a modest building, beige brick, sturdy and unpretentious. It was mine. I paid the rent. I bought the furniture. There were no ghosts here, usually, but tonight, as I walked up the stairs to the second floor, I felt the heavy shadow of Hollow Creek following me. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The air was still and warm. My cat, Barnaby, rubbed against my ankles, purring a welcome that asked for nothing more than a scratch behind the ears. I dropped my keys on the small console table. My eyes drifted across the living room to the closet door, which was slightly ajar. Peeking out from the bottom shelf was the corner of my large suitcase. It was a dark blue hardshell case I had bought 5 years ago for a trip to Italy. That never happened because Dad had thrown his back out and needed help around the house for 3 weeks. I stared at that suitcase. My body seemed to recognize the shape of the solution before my brain could process the logistics. It was a gravitational pull. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't take off my boots. I walked across the living room, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, and pulled the suitcase out. My phone chimed in my pocket. A text message. I knew who it was. I pulled it out, dread curling in my stomach. Don't forget 30 people. Make me look good. I stared at the words. Make me look good. There it was. The invoice. The transaction fee. He didn't want a family Christmas. He wanted a stage production where he played the benevolent patriarch, and I was the stagehand in black clothing, invisible in the wings, pulling the ropes and sweating to make sure the spotlight hit him at the exact right angle. He wanted the credit for the feast he didn't cook and the warmth he didn't create. I looked at the phrase, "make me look good," and felt it sear into my retinas. It was the summary of my entire existence as his daughter. Be quiet, be helpful, be perfect, make Glenn Howard look like a success. I looked down at the suitcase lying flat on the floor. I wasn't packing to go to Hollow Creek. I wasn't packing to go early and start scrubbing his baseboards. I reached down and unzipped the main compartment. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet apartment, like a tear in the fabric of reality. I wasn't doing this to threaten him. I wasn't doing this to teach him a lesson. Because men like Glenn Howard did not learn lessons. They only learned inconveniences. I was doing this because the thread had snapped. And without that tension holding me in place, I was finally free to move. I walked to my bedroom and grabbed a stack of sweaters. I wasn't running away. I was simply choosing, for the first time in 34 years, to live in a reality where I mattered. I placed the first sweater into the case. It was red, a cheerful, bright red. It looked terrible against the dark blue lining. But it didn't matter. It was mine. I was done making him look good. It was time to see what I looked like when I wasn't standing in his shadow. As I folded a pair of heavy denim jeans and placed them into the suitcase, my hand brushed against the lining of the pocket. I felt a receipt crumbling inside. I didn't need to pull it out to know what it was. It was likely from the grocery run I had done for myself 3 days ago. Eggs, spinach, a bottle of cheap Pinot Grigio. But the sensation of the crinkling paper sent my mind spiraling back, rewinding the tape to see exactly how I had ended up standing in my bedroom, plotting a silent rebellion against my own father. It hadn't started as a hostage situation. That was the tragedy of it. It had started with love. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the half-packed suitcase open like a hungry mouth beside me. I allowed myself to remember the first year. It was 6 years ago. Mom had passed away in October. The grief was still so thick in the air at Hollow Creek that you could taste it, metallic and heavy. That Christmas, nobody knew what to do. Dad was a ghost haunting his own living room, staring at the television without turning it on. The house felt cold. So, I stepped up. I didn't do it because I was asked. I did it because the silence terrified me. I bought the tree. I cooked Mom's traditional glazed ham. I wrapped gifts for the cousins. I scrubbed the bathrooms because I couldn't stand the thought of guests seeing the house fall apart along with my father. That night, after everyone had left, Dad had hugged me. He had cried into my shoulder, his frame shaking, and whispered that I had saved him. Aunt Janice had squeezed my hand and told me I was the glue holding us all together. I cherished that compliment. I wore it like a badge of honor. I thought that was what family did. We carried each other when one of us was too weak to walk. But grief eventually fades into a new normal. For everyone else, the fog lifted. For me, the chains were just being forged. By the second year, the dynamic had shifted. It was subtle, insidious, like water damage behind a wall. There was no tearful request for help. Instead, there was a phone call in mid-November. Glenn didn't ask if I was available. He just said, "The Lanes are coming at 4 o'clock. Make sure the appetizers are ready by 3:30. I remembered holding the phone, confused. "Oh, are we doing the big dinner again?" "Of course," he had snapped, as if I were stupid. "It is tradition. Tradition." That was the word he used to weld the shackles shut. Over the next 4 years, the definition of perfect began to inflate, expanding like a balloon that I was expected to fill with my own breath and money. It wasn't just about having dinner anymore. It became about the performance. The table had to look like something out of a lifestyle catalog. Paper napkins were banned. We needed linen, and not just any linen, crisp, white, professionally pressed linen. We couldn't just have cheddar and crackers. We needed a charcuterie board with imported brie, fig jam, and prosciutto from a specific deli 40 minutes away. And here was the kicker. The part that made my stomach churn as I sat there in my quiet apartment. I paid for it. I worked in hospital administration. I made a decent living, but I was not wealthy. I had student loans. I had car payments. I was trying to save for a down payment on a house that seemed to move further out of reach every year. But every December, my bank account would hemorrhage money. Why did I do it? Why did I swipe my credit card for $300 worth of prime rib? Why did I drop $200 on floral centerpieces that would be dead in 3 days? Because I was a coward. I was terrified of the pause. I was terrified of the moment when the bill came and everyone looked at the ceiling. I was scared of Aunt Marissa, the matriarch of the Lane side of the family, raising a perfectly manicured eyebrow and asking why there wasn't enough wine, or why the roast was a cheaper cut. I was paralyzed by the fear of being labeled stingy or unsuccessful. Glenn knew this. He weaponized my pride against me. I remembered a conversation from 2 years ago. We were in the kitchen at Hollow Creek. I was up to my elbows in soapy water, scrubbing a roasting pan that was older than I was. Dad was standing in the doorway, swirling a glass of scotch, watching me. "Dad," I had said, trying to keep my voice casual, "the grocery bill was pretty high this year. Do you think maybe everyone could chip in $20? Or maybe you could cover the alcohol?" He had sighed, that long, disappointed sound that made me feel 6 inches tall. "Lucy, please, family shouldn't count costs. It is so tacky to talk about money when we are trying to celebrate. Don't make everything into a transaction." "I am not making it a transaction," I had argued weakly. "I am just saying it is a lot for one person." "You are too sensitive," he had said, taking a sip of his drink. "You always have been. Just focus on the joy of giving, sweetheart. It comes back to you." It did not come back to me. What came back to me was the erasure of my effort. That was the bitterest pill, the one that stuck in my throat every single year. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene from last Christmas. It was vivid. High-definition humiliation. The house was packed. The fire was crackling. The smell of pine and roasted garlic filled the air scents I had created. Glenn stood at the head of the table, tapping a spoon against his glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," he had boomed, his face flushed with wine and satisfaction. "I love having this house full. It means the world to me to provide a place for us all to gather. I wanted everything to be perfect for you all, and I think we pulled it off." "Here, here," Uncle Bob had shouted. "Glenn, the beef is exquisite," Aunt Marissa had purred. "You really know how to host, Glenn. Such taste." And where was I? I was in the kitchen, pulling a tray of burning hot dinner rolls out of the oven. I was sweating. My makeup had melted hours ago. My feet were throbbing in my shoes. When I finally walked out to the dining room to refill the water pitchers, Aunt Janice had looked up at me with a pitying smile. "Oh, look at her," she had chirped to the table. "Always running around. Lucy just loves to be busy, doesn't she? She can't sit still. She loves to be busy." They had rewritten my servitude as a personality quirk. They had decided that I wasn't working. I was indulging in a hobby. I wasn't a servant. I was just a frantic little creature who enjoyed stress. It absolved them of all guilt. If Lucy enjoyed the bustle, then nobody needed to help her. Nobody needed to clear a plate. Nobody needed to offer a check. They were doing me a favor by letting me serve them. I opened my eyes and looked around my living room. There were gaps on my shelves. My silver serving platter was gone. It was at Dad's house. I had brought it over 3 years ago for the turkey, and when I tried to take it home, he said, "Just leave it. You will need it for Easter." It never came back. My expensive, heavy-bottomed roasting pot at Dad's, my set of crystal wine glasses that I had bought with my first bonus at Dad's, my best tablecloths at Dad's. My labor had been colonized. My possessions had been annexed. The house at Hollow Creek had slowly absorbed the best parts of my life, leaving me with the empty spaces. It was as if his house felt entitled to own anything that made me useful. I stood up and walked over to my desk. I needed to see it. I needed the cold, hard data to stiffen my resolve. Because a part of me, the part trained to be a good daughter, was already whispering that I was being cruel by packing that suitcase. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. I pulled up the search function and filtered for December over the last 5 years. The graph appeared on the screen. It looked like the heartbeat of a dying patient, flat, 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 and then a massive, jagged spike every December. Year 1, $800, manageable. I was grieving. Year 2, $1,200. The upgrades began. Year 3, $1,800. The year of the prime rib. Year 4, $2,100. The year the heater broke at Dad's, and I paid for the emergency repair so the guests wouldn't be cold. Year 5, $2,500. The upscale year. I stared at the total at the bottom of the column. Over $8,000 in 5 years. That was my emergency fund. That was a trip to Europe. That was the new transmission my car desperately needed. And what did I have to show for it? A text message from my father demanding perfection. A generic thank you card from Aunt Janice signed with a stamped signature. and the reputation of being the girl who likes to be busy. I felt the anger rising again, but this time it wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold. It was calculating. It was the kind of anger that clarifies vision. I reached for my phone. I needed a witness. I needed someone to look at the reality with me so I didn't gaslight myself into thinking I was the crazy one. I scrolled to Tessa's name, Tessa Monroe, my best friend since sophomore year of college. She was the only person who knew the truth, though even she didn't know the full financial extent of it. I hit dial. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Luce, I thought you'd be drowning in marinara sauce by now. Isn't it prep week?" Her voice was light, teasing. She expected the usual complaints. She expected me to vent for 10 minutes about the menu and then go do it anyway. "Dad called," I said. My voice was steady, surprisingly calm. "He did it again." There was a silence on the other end. Tessa knew what it meant. She knew the tone. She knew the demands. 30 people, I continued, staring at the open suitcase. "He wants it upscale. He wants it perfect. And he hasn't offered to pay for a single carrot." Tessa didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She stayed quiet for a long moment, letting the weight of my words hang in the air between us. "Okay," Tessa said finally. Her voice dropped an octave, losing all its teasing lightness. "So here is the question, Lucy, and I need you to answer it honestly. What? Are you going to play the role this time?" she asked. "Are you going to put on the apron, drain your savings account, and let them treat you like the hired help while Glenn takes the bow? Is that who you are this year?" The question hung there. It wasn't an accusation. It was a challenge. It was a mirror held up to my face. I looked at the red sweater in my suitcase. I looked at the bank statement on my screen. I looked at the empty spot on the shelf where my silver platter used to be. "No," I whispered. Then, louder, "No." "Good," Tessa said. "Then what are you going to do?" "I am going to resign," I said. "Effective immediately. Resign." Tessa repeated the word, tasting it. "Resigning implies you have a contract. Lucy, it implies you have benefits, a salary, and a human resources department to file a complaint with when the boss creates a hostile work environment. You don't have any of that. You aren't an employee. You are volunteer tribute." I held the phone tighter, pacing the small length of my kitchen. "That is harsh." "Is it?" Tessa countered. Her voice was surgical, cutting away the emotional fat to expose the bone. "Let's look at the org chart. Marissa is the CEO who critiques the strategy. Glenn is the project manager who takes credit for the deliverables. Janice is the PR department, spinning the exploitation as family bonding. And you are the unpaid intern they send out for coffee. Except the coffee costs $5,000 and takes a week to brew." She paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to be uncomfortable. "You are not the daughter they are asking for help. Lucy, you are the staff they forgot to put on the payroll. Actually, it is worse. Staff gets to go home at 5. Staff gets overtime. You just get the privilege of cleaning up the wrapping paper while they drink the brandy you bought." I stopped pacing. I was standing in front of my refrigerator. I pulled the handle and the door swung open, the light flickering on to reveal the sad, quiet truth of my actual life. There was a carton of almond milk, a container of Greek yogurt, half a rotisserie chicken from 3 days ago, and a bag of spinach that was starting to look questionable. It was a fridge for one. It was a life for one. It was manageable. It was peaceful. I tried to superimpose Glenn's demands over this image. I tried to imagine fitting a prime rib, 5 pounds of potatoes, 3 crates of wine, and trays of appetizers into this space. The cognitive dissonance made my head spin. My life was small, self-contained, and solvent. His demands were a tidal wave designed to crash through my front door and drown everything I had built. "You are right," I said to Tessa. My voice sounded different to my own ears, less tremulous, more like the steel that reinforced the hospital walls I worked within. "I know I am right," Tessa said. "The question is, what is the plan? Because if you just don't show up, they will send a search party, or the police. Glenn is dramatic enough to do it. I am not going to just not show up," I said, my mind racing. "I am going to change the venue." "What does that mean?" It means I am taking myself off the board. Before Tessa could ask more, a chime sounded in my ear. I pulled the phone away from my face to check the screen. A text message. It was from Aunt Janice. So glad you are handling everything again. Sweetie, you always make Christmas so special. We are all so relieved we don't have to worry about a thing knowing you are in charge. Love you. I read it twice. On the surface, it was affectionate. It was a warm, fuzzy message from a loving aunt. But under the microscope of my new perspective, it looked like a binding contract signed without my consent. We are all so relieved. Translation: we are lazy. We don't have to worry about a thing. Translation: you carry the anxiety for all of us. You make it special. Translation: if it is not special, it is your fault. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, wrapped in a bow of toxic positivity. If I complained now, I wouldn't just be unhelpful. I would be destroying their relief. I would be the monster who shattered the peace they were so generously enjoying at my expense. Janice just texted, I told Tessa. Let me guess, Tessa said dryly. You are an angel. We couldn't do it without you. Close. We are so relieved. God, Tessa groaned. That is the worst one. It is weaponized gratitude. They are thanking you in advance so you can't back out. It is a trap. Lucy. I know, I said, and I am not stepping in it. I hung up with Tessa a moment later, promising to keep her updated. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like a war room. I sat down at my small kitchen table and opened my notebook. I needed to visualize the week ahead if I complied. I needed to scare myself into action. If I said yes, tomorrow would start with a panic attack. I would have to leave work early, using my own vacation time, to hit the wholesale club. I would push a cart with a wobbling wheel through the aisles, fighting grandmothers for the last blocks of high-end cheddar. I would spend $600 in 40 minutes. Thursday night would be cleaning. I would drive to Hollow Creek. I would spend 5 hours on my knees scrubbing the grout in the guest bathroom because Glenn had mentioned the tiles looked dingy. I would dust the ceiling fans. I would vacuum the drapes. Friday would be prep, chopping onions until I cried, peeling 10 pounds of potatoes until my hands cramped, marinating the meat, setting the table with the precision of a bomb disposal unit, measuring the distance between the forks and the knives because Marissa would notice if they were off. And Saturday, Christmas Eve, the arrival, the performance, I would be in the kitchen, sweating through my nice blouse, monitoring 3 timers, while the sound of laughter drifted in from the living room. I would come out with the tray of appetizers, the ones I paid for, and they would smile and take them without making eye contact, continuing their conversation about whose child got into a better college, and then the bill would come due. Not the financial bill, I would have already paid that. The emotional bill, the feeling of being hollowed out, the feeling of being a prop in my own family. I looked down at my notebook and wrote a single sentence, pressing the pen so hard into the paper that it tore through to the next page. If a holiday collapses because one person refuses to be the servant, it is not a holiday, it is a trap. That was it. That was the truth I had been running from. A real family celebration is a potluck of effort. It is a shared burden. If the entire structure of the perfect Christmas rested on my spine, then the structure was rotten. It deserved to collapse. But I couldn't just scream at Glenn. I couldn't call him and list my grievances. I knew how that movie ended. He would interrupt. He would gaslight. He would use phrases like, "After everything I have done for you," and "You are ruining the memory of your mother." He would drag me into the mud of emotional debate, and he had more experience wrestling there than I did. I couldn't win an argument. So, I wouldn't have one. I would choose a different battlefield. I would choose the battlefield of logistics. I turned the page in my notebook and wrote a new header, the separation of assets. If I was resigning, I needed to take my equipment with me. I started listing everything in Glenn's house that I had purchased, maintained, or lent to the cause. The silver serving platter, value $200. The set of 12 linen napkins, value $80. The heavy roasting pan, value $150. The crystal wine glasses, value $300. The high-end spice collection in the pantry, value approx $100. The Dyson vacuum cleaner I left there last year because his broke value $400. The emergency cash stash in the cookie jar. Value $200. The list went on. It was staggering. I wasn't just the cook. I was the venture capitalist funding this entire operation. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 at night. Glenn would be asleep in his recliner in front of the news. The house at Hollow Creek would be dark. I needed to move fast. But first, I needed a destination. I wasn't going to stay in my apartment. If I stayed here, Glenn would drive over. He would pound on the door. He would cause a scene in the hallway that would make my neighbors call the landlord. I needed to be geographically unavailable. I opened my laptop and pulled up a travel site. I didn't want to go too far. I needed to be close enough to return if there was a genuine life or death emergency, but far enough to be inconvenient. I typed in Harbor Point. It was a small coastal town 3 hours north. In the summer, it was a tourist trap. In the winter, it was a ghost town of wind-battered cottages and gray waves. It was perfect. I found a place called the Harbor Point Inn. It wasn't luxury, but it wasn't a motel. It had a fireplace in the lobby and a no-disturb policy that I intended to test to its limits. I booked a room for 2 nights. Check-in tomorrow afternoon. The confirmation email hit my inbox with a satisfying ping. It felt like the sound of a jail cell unlocking. Now for the hardest part. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Glenn's contact name. My instinct was to explain, to write a paragraph apologizing, making up a lie about a sudden work crisis, begging for forgiveness. I am so sorry. Dad. But the hospital needs me. No. Explanations were footholds. If I gave him a reason, he would argue with it. If I said work, he would say, call in sick. If I said sick, he would say, you can still supervise. I needed to be a wall, smooth, vertical, and impossible to climb. I typed the message. I kept it brief. I kept it professional. I channeled the cold, administrative energy of the rejection letters I had to send to patients every day. Dad, something came up. I have to go on a work trip early tomorrow morning. Won't be around for a few days. The key is under the mat if you need to let the cleaners in. I didn't mention the cleaners were canceled. That was a surprise for later. I didn't mention I wasn't coming back for Christmas. Let him assume a few days meant I would rush back just in time to save him. Let him sit in the comfort of his assumption until the reality of the empty refrigerator hit him. I looked at the message. It was a lie, but it was a necessary shield. It was the only way to break the cycle without breaking myself. I hit send. Then, before the delivered receipt could even register, before the inevitable 3 dots of his typing could appear, I did something I had never done in my life. I held down the power button on the side of my phone. Slide to power off. I slid my finger across the screen. The light vanished. The screen went black. The connection was severed. For a moment, panic flared in my chest. What if he needs me? What if he has a heart attack? What if the house burns down, then... A cooler. Calmer voice answered. He is a grown man. He has a phone. He has neighbors. He has 30 relatives coming to save him. I tossed the dead phone onto the sofa. It landed with a soft thud. I stood in the silence of my apartment, feeling the adrenaline vibrate in my fingertips. I wasn't just leaving town. I was staging a coup, and the first act of the revolution was going to be a raid on my own property. I went to the closet and grabbed a second bag, a large, sturdy canvas tote. Okay, Barnaby, I said to the cat, who was watching me from the top of the bookshelf with yellow, judging eyes. I am going to get my roasting pan back. I grabbed my car keys. The night was young. The roads were icy, and for the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward an obligation. I was driving toward justice. The digital clock on my dashboard read 4:45 in the morning when I rolled into the driveway of the house at Hollow Creek. The world was pitch black, save for the blue-gray tint of the snow reflecting the moonlight. The house loomed large and silent, a sleeping beast that had fed on my energy for a decade. I killed the headlights immediately to avoid sweeping a beam across Glenn's bedroom window on the 2nd floor. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, listening to the silence. This was usually the time I would be arriving to start the turkey, my stomach in knots, my mind racing through a checklist of chores. But today, my heart rate was slow. My hands were steady. I wasn't here to serve. I was here to repossess. I stepped out of the car. the crunch of frozen gravel under my boots sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. I moved to the side door, the one that led directly into the kitchen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key. It was a copy I had paid for myself 5 years ago because Glenn kept forgetting to leave the front door unlocked for me. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of the kitchen. It smelled of stale coffee and that specific, woody scent of old furniture polish. From upstairs, I could hear the faint, rhythmic rumble of my father's snoring. He was deep asleep, likely dreaming of the prime rib I was supposed to be seasoning right now. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want to wake him. Instead, I clicked on the small under-cabinet LEDs that cast a soft, surgical glow over the granite countertops. I set my canvas tote bag on the island and took a deep breath. This was a heist, but it wasn't a crime. You cannot steal what you already own. I was simply conducting an asset separation. I started with the pantry. I opened the tall double doors and stared at the shelves. To an outsider, it looked like a well-stocked larder ready for a feast. To me, it looked like a ledger of debts. I reached for the top shelf. There, sitting like trophies, were the items I had purchased over the last 3 months, slowly stockpiling for the upscale menu Glenn demanded. I took down the jar of saffron threads, $40, into the bag. I took the bottle of aged balsamic vinegar from Modena, $60, into the bag. I took the 3 bags of macadamia nuts, the box of Belgian baking chocolate, the truffle oil, and the imported artichoke hearts. I worked with the precision of a librarian. I didn't knock things over. I didn't leave gaping holes. When I removed the 4 boxes of artisan crackers I had bought for the cheese board, I slid Glenn's half-eaten box of saltines to the front to fill the gap. When I took my bag of fair trade espresso beans, I moved his canister of generic instant coffee into the prime position. I wasn't ransacking the house. I was simply resetting it to its factory settings. I was removing the Lucy Premium package and leaving the basic Glenn Standard model. Next, the liquor cabinet. This was where the real money sat. I opened the glass doors and saw the rows of bottles. Glenn liked to brag about his collection, but he never bought it. I pulled out the 2 bottles of single malt scotch I had bought for Uncle Bob, into the bag. I took the 6 bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon that I had selected for the main course. They clinked softly as I nested them between the bags of nuts. I left the bottle of cheap vodka that Glenn used for mixers. I left the half-empty rum. I left the box wine. That was what he had contributed. That was what he could serve. I moved to the refrigerator. This was the most critical part. The fridge was humming quietly. I pulled the door open. The light inside seemed blindingly bright. I bypassed the condiments and went straight for the proteins. I grabbed the 3 packs of high-end bacon I had bought for the Christmas morning breakfast. I took the wheels of brie and camembert. I took the prosciutto and the salami. I took the bag of jumbo shrimp from the freezer. I looked at the shelves when I was done. It wasn't empty. There was a carton of milk, a jar of pickles, a block of generic cheddar cheese, half a loaf of bread, and some leftover takeout containers. It was a refrigerator for 1 man. It was perfectly adequate for survival. It just wasn't adequate for a party of 30 people expecting a magazine cover feast. I closed the fridge door. I walked into the dining room. The table was already partially set, not by Glenn, of course, but by me. During my visit last weekend, the tablecloth was my grandmother's damask linen, which I had restored and kept at my apartment until last week. The candlesticks were mine. The heavy silver charger plates were mine. I stripped the table. I folded the tablecloth, the fabric cool and smooth against my hands. I gathered the candlesticks. I took the silver chargers. I walked them to the back of the house, to the small storage room off the laundry area where we kept the extra chairs. I placed everything inside the linens, the silver, the expensive wreaths I had hung on the back doors, the heavy serving platters I had retrieved from the buffet. I didn't take these things with me. They were too bulky to carry to the car in one trip, and I didn't want to risk the noise of multiple trips. Instead, I closed the door to the storage room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy-duty padlock. I had bought it yesterday at the hardware store. The storage room door had a simple latch that accommodated a lock. I slid the shackle through the metal loops and clicked it shut. Click, the sound was final. The assets were frozen. The decorations were on the premises, technically, but they were now under my jurisdiction. If he wanted them, he would have to break the door down, and Glenn Howard was not a man who knew how to use a crowbar. I went back to the kitchen. My bag was heavy. Filled with the culinary soul of the party, I zipped it shut. I checked my watch. 5:15. He was still sleeping. Now for the administrative work. I pulled out my phone, not the one I had turned off, but an old backup phone I kept in the car for emergencies. It was connected to the Wi-Fi. I found the number for Sparkle Clean, the service that came every Thursday. I had been paying them for 2 years. Glenn thought the house just magically stayed dust-free because he was neat. I dialed the number. It went to their automated after-hours service, but I knew the owner. Sarah, check the voicemail at 6 every morning. Hi, this is Lucy Howard, I whispered into the phone. I am calling regarding the service for Glenn Howard's residence at 12 Oak Lane. I am canceling the service effectively immediately. Please do not send the crew this Thursday. Also, please note that any future bookings must be made and paid for directly by Mr. Glenn Howard. My card is no longer authorized for this account. I paused, imagining Sarah's face when she heard this. She had once told me, "Your dad is so charming. He always says the house looks great thanks to his management." Actually, I added, a small, cold smile touching my lips. If he calls and asks why you didn't show up, please tell him the billing information was removed by the account holder. Thank you. Twist number 1. The stage would be dirty. Now for twist number 2. I opened the banking app on the backup phone. I navigated to the credit card section. I found the card ending in 4098, the emergency family card, the one Glenn carried in his wallet, the one he used to buy last-minute things that I inevitably paid for because the bill came to my address. I didn't cancel it. Canceling it would cause a decline notification immediately if he used it for his morning coffee, which might alert him too soon. Instead, I went to card controls. I selected Set Spending Limit. The current limit was $10,000. I backspaced over the numbers. I typed in 100, $100. That was enough for a few pizzas. It was enough for a case of cheap beer. It was not enough to cater a banquet for 30 people when he realized the fridge was empty. It was not enough to hire a last-minute caterer. I saved the setting. The bank app confirmed limit updated. I put the phone away. The heist was complete. The food was gone. The decorations were locked. The cleaning crew was fired. The funding was cut. I took a piece of heavy cardstock from my bag. I had written it in the car before I came in, so my handwriting wouldn't look shaky. I walked over to the kitchen island, right where he always sat to drink his coffee. I placed his spare key on the granite. It was the key he had given me 10 years ago, the symbol of my access and my obligation. I placed the note on top of the key. I am not cooking. I am not cleaning. I am not serving. Have a perfect Christmas. It was brutal in its simplicity. No apologies, no explanations, just a statement of fact. I picked up my heavy tote bag. I took one last look around the kitchen. It looked normal. The counters were clear. The appliances were shining, but it was a hollow shell. The magic that made it a home, the smell of food, the warmth, the anticipation was in the bag slung over my shoulder. I walked to the door. I opened it and stepped out into the biting wind. The cold hit my face, but for the first time in my life, it didn't make me shiver. I closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. I wasn't protecting this house anymore. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my feet. I threw the bag into the passenger seat. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked up at the second-floor window. It was still dark. Glenn was still sleeping, dreaming of his perfect Christmas, unaware that he was about to wake up in a house that had been stripped of its engine. I drove away. My chest felt strange. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for the crushing anxiety that usually followed any act of defiance, but it didn't come. Instead, as I merged onto the main road leading out of Hollow Creek, watching the first gray light of dawn bleed into the sky, I felt something else. I felt light. It was a physical sensation, as if gravity had released its hold on my bones. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't a servant. I was just Lucy. And for the first time in 34 years, I was driving toward a destination of my own choosing. The highway stretched out before me like a gray ribbon cutting through the white, frozen landscape of Michigan. I had turned my main phone back on 5 miles outside of Hollow Creek, mostly because I needed the GPS to navigate the back roads toward the coast, but also because of a morbid, self-destructive curiosity. I wanted to see the fallout. I wanted to see the explosion. I did not have to wait long. The phone sitting in the cup holder began to vibrate. It wasn't a ring. I had kept it on silent. It was a low, angry buzz that rattled against the hard plastic. It stopped for 3 seconds, then started again, then again. It was a relentless, mechanical heartbeat of panic. I glanced down. Dad. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the road, watching the speedometer needle hover at exactly 70 miles per hour. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white. Every time the phone buzzed, my shoulders jumped. It was a physical reflex, a conditioned response cultivated over 3 decades of jumping whenever Glenn Howard snapped his fingers. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It felt like he was in the car with me, poking me in the ribs. I drove for another 40 minutes before the fuel light dinged. It was a valid excuse to stop, a reason that had nothing to do with running away. I pulled into a gas station that looked like an island of fluorescent light in the middle of a dark ocean of pine trees. The wind was howling as I stepped out to pump the gas, cutting through my coat. But I welcomed it. The cold made me feel real. I leaned against the side of the car and finally picked up the phone. There were 14 missed calls, 9 from Dad, 2 from Aunt Janice, 3 from a cousin I hadn't spoken to since Easter. Then there were the texts. I scrolled to the bottom and read them in chronological order, watching the emotional trajectory of my father play out in blue bubbles. 6:15 a.m. Where are you? The coffee maker is empty. 6:20. Very funny. Lucy, come back and make breakfast. I have a lot to do today. 6:45 a.m. I found the note. This is childish. You are 34 years old, not a teenager. Pick up the phone. 7:10 a.m. Lucy, I opened the fridge. Where's the food? Where's the prime rib? 7:15 a.m. Stop playing games. The Lanes are coming tomorrow. I have nothing to serve them. You need to bring the food back right now. 7:30 a.m. I don't know the password for the cleaning service. They aren't answering. The house is a mess. What am I supposed to do? I stood there, the smell of gasoline mixing with the crisp winter air, and read the messages a second time. I was looking for something specific. I was looking for 3 words. Are you okay? Or perhaps, is something wrong? They weren't there. Not once did he ask why I had left. Not once did he consider that maybe I had snapped, or that I was hurt, or that I was in trouble. His entire stream of consciousness was focused solely on the inconvenience my absence caused him. He wasn't worried about his daughter. He was worried about his event manager. He was worried about the prime rib. He was worried about the dust on the baseboards. A profound sadness settled over me. It wasn't the sharp, hot anger of the morning. It was a heavy, dull ache. It was the realization that I could drive this car off a bridge, and Glenn's first reaction would be to wonder who was going to iron the tablecloths. The phone buzzed in my hand again. Incoming call, Aunt Janice. I hesitated. Janice was the diplomat. She was the one who smoothed things over. The one who whispered, "He doesn't mean it," while handing you a tissue. But she was also the enforcer of the status quo. Her peace was always purchased at my expense. I slid the icon to answer. Hello. Oh, thank God. Janice's voice was breathless, pitched high with manufactured relief. Lucy, honey, where are you? Your father is climbing the walls. He says you took the food. I took the food I paid for, I said. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me. I was shaking on the inside, but the words came out flat and steady. Okay, Janice soothed. Listen, we know you are stressed. It is a big holiday. We all appreciate how hard you work, but you can't just leave him like this. The house is half cleaned. He doesn't even know how to turn on the oven properly for a roast that size. Then he shouldn't host a roast that size, I said. There was a pause on the line. Janice wasn't used to resistance. She was used to compliance wrapped in a sigh. Lucy, she said, her tone shifting from concern to a gentle scolding. Don't be like this. Just come back for a bit. Bring the food back. Help him get set up, and we can talk about it. Just do it to keep the peace. You know how he gets. For the family. To keep the peace, I repeated. Whose peace? Aunt Janice. His yours. Because it certainly isn't mine. We are family, she insisted, effectively ignoring my question. Family helps each other. I have helped, I said. I have helped for 10 years. I have paid for everything. I have done everything, and I am done. So you are just going to let him fail? She asked. The sweetness was evaporating, revealing the judgment underneath. You are going to let 30 people show up to an empty table just to prove a point. I am not doing it to prove a point. I am doing it because I cannot afford to be his servant anymore, financially or emotionally. Just come back. She tried one last time, desperation creeping in. Please, for me. I looked out at the highway. A semi-truck roared past, kicking up a cloud of snow. I realized that if I turned back now, I would never leave again. The chains would be welded back on, twice as thick as before. No, I said. I'm not coming back. I hung up. The silence that followed was heavy, like a stone dropping into a deep well. I had never said no to Janice before. I had never denied the keep the peace request. It felt terrifying. It felt illegal. But as I put the nozzle back into the pump and screwed the gas cap back on, I noticed my hands had stopped shaking. I got back into the car and drove. I arrived at Harbor Point 3 hours later. The town was huddled against the gray, churning water of Lake Michigan, the streets largely empty. The Harbor Point Inn was a sturdy, cedar-shingled building that looked like it had withstood 1,000 storms. I checked in at the front desk. The receptionist was a young woman who looked like she would rather be anywhere else. She didn't ask me why I was alone. She didn't ask me if the room needed to be upscale. She just handed me a plastic key card and said, Room 203. Breakfast is until 10. I walked into the room. It was generic. The carpet was a sensible beige. The bedspread was a floral pattern that had gone out of style in the 90s. The furniture was scratched pine. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. There was no dust I needed to clean. There was no menu I needed to prep. There was no expectation hovering in the corners. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence was absolute. In my father's house, silence was a vacuum that needed to be filled with activity. Here, silence was just silence. I lay back on the bed, staring at the textured ceiling. I felt like an astronaut who had just detached from the mothership, drifting in space. It was lonely, yes, but the oxygen was mine. My phone pinged, a text message. I braced myself for another assault from Glenn, but it wasn't him. It was a number I didn't save often, but I recognized it. It was my cousin, Mike. He was the quiet one, the one who usually sat in the corner watching football while the chaos swirled around him. Mike. Hey Lucy, just a heads up. My flight got canceled, so we are driving in. We will be at Uncle Glenn's by tonight instead of tomorrow morning. Mom says you aren't there. My stomach dropped. Tonight. They were arriving tonight. The panic flared up again. Hot and immediate. The rescue reflex kicked in hard. I sat up, my heart hammering. They will get there and find nothing. No food, no heat turned up, no beds made. It will be a disaster. My brain started plotting the logistics automatically. If I leave now, I can be back by 7. I can stop at the store on the way. I can throw some lasagnas in the oven. I can salvage it. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. I was halfway to the door before I froze. I looked at my hand, gripping the keys. This was the addiction. This was the sickness. The belief that it was my job to prevent other adults from experiencing the consequences of their own lack of planning. Mike was 30 years old. Glenn was 65. Why was I the only one responsible for their comfort? I forced my fingers to open. The keys fell onto the dresser with a clatter. No, I said aloud to the empty room. Let them arrive. Let them see it. But the anxiety was a physical energy that needed to go somewhere. I couldn't sit in the room. I needed to move. I put on my coat and scarf and walked out of the hotel. I crossed the street and headed toward the pier. The wind off the lake was brutal here, a solid wall of ice that pushed against me, making it hard to breathe. I walked into the wind. I wanted to feel the resistance. I needed to be reminded that walking away was hard work. I walked until my face was numb and my legs burned. I imagined the scene happening at Hollow Creek right now. Glenn pacing, the empty pantry, the realization slowly sinking in that the magic elf wasn't coming out of the woodwork to fix it. It is a trap, I reminded myself, reciting the line from my notebook. If it collapses, it was never a celebration. It was a hostage situation. I turned around at the end of the pier and looked back at the town. The lights of the inn were warm and inviting. I was safe. I was out. I walked back to the hotel, my body tired, but my mind clearing. I was beginning to accept that I had actually done it. I had pressed the button. I stepped into the lobby, stomping the snow off my boots. I reached into my pocket to check the time. The phone was ringing again. I sighed, expecting Glenn. I pulled it out. It wasn't Glenn. It wasn't Janice. It wasn't Mike. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize. No name. Just a local area code from back home. I stared at it. Usually, I wouldn't answer unknown numbers, but something about the timing felt deliberate. The family was imploding. The shockwaves were spreading. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the green button. Was this another flying monkey sent by Janice? A neighbor Glenn had roped into shaming me. Or was it something else? I took a breath, stepped into a quiet corner of the lobby away from the receptionist, and answered, "Hello." The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative, and utterly unexpected. "Lucy Howard?" the woman asked. "Yes." "This is Marissa Lane." My blood ran cold. Marissa, the matriarch of the extended family, the woman Glenn was terrified of impressing, the woman who inspected silverware for water spots. She was the one person Glenn wanted this entire charade to be perfect for. "I am currently standing in your father's kitchen," Marissa said. Her voice was unreadable, stripped of the usual pleasantries. "And I have a question." The lobby of the Harbor Point Inn was quiet, save for the crackling of the fireplace and the low hum of the vending machine in the corner. But inside my phone, a riot was breaking out. I had not hung up on Marissa Lane yet. I was holding the phone to my ear. My breath caught in my throat, but before I could answer her, a barrage of notifications flooded the screen, lighting up the dim corner where I stood. It was as if the dam holding back the reality of the situation at Hollow Creek had finally burst, and the digital debris was hitting me all at once. To understand what was happening, you have to understand the geography of my family. We are not people who communicate directly. We operate in side channels, in whispers, and in group chats that exclude the person we are talking about. And right now, I was the subject, the object, and the missing piece of the puzzle. Through the texts popping up from my cousins, the social media notifications, and the sheer intuition built over 34 years of managing these people, I could see the scene at my father's house with terrifying clarity. It was playing out in my mind like a multi-screen security feed. Scene 1. The arrival. A text from my cousin Mike flashed. "Just pulled in. Where do we park?" "Driveway is full of Uncle Glenn's truck and the boat he said he sold." I closed my eyes and I could see it. The gravel crunching under the tires of 3 different SUVs, the heavy thud of car doors closing in the biting Michigan wind, the chaos of 30 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few toddlers spilling out onto the driveway. They would be shivering, clutching casseroles and garment bags, expecting the warm, golden glow of the Christmas house. Usually, I would have been at the door. I would have had the outdoor floodlights on. I would have had a wreath on the door the size of a tractor tire, one that I had spent 2 hours fluffing the night before. I would have been taking coats, directing traffic, and handing out hot cider within 30 seconds of their entry. Instead, the house was dark. Another text. This one from my younger cousin. "Bella, is the doorbell broken? We have been standing here for 5 minutes. Inside the house. I knew exactly what was happening." Glenn was panicking. He had likely been upstairs trying to fix his tie. Assuming that the elves me would handle the arrival, he would have heard the cars and waited for the familiar sounds of me greeting them. When the silence stretched on, when the doorbell rang a second time, the reality that he was the only adult on the premises would have hit him like a bucket of ice water. Scene 2. The entry. I could imagine the door finally opening, Glenn standing there, breathless, his face flushed not from the heat of the oven, but from the heat of anxiety. He would be wearing his red cashmere sweater, the one I dry cleaned for him last week, and he would be smiling that tight, politician smile he used when he forgot someone's name. "Welcome, welcome," he would boom, too loud, overcompensating for the dark hallway. The family would shuffle in, stomping snow off their boots, and then the pause. The sensory details of the house were wrong. There was no smell of rosemary and garlic roasting. There was no scent of cinnamon candles. The air would smell like stale coffee, and the lemon furniture polish I used on the table 2 weeks ago, it was the smell of a bachelor pad, not a banquet hall. "Where is the tree?" I imagined Aunt Janice asking, her voice pitching up. There was no tree. I usually bought it, set it up, and decorated it 3 days before the party. This year, the corner of the living room was just an empty corner with a lonely electrical outlet. "Where is the food?" Uncle Bob would ask, looking toward the dining room where the buffet usually stretched out in all its glory. The table was bare, no linens, no silver, no centerpieces, just a long, dark wood surface that looked cold and uninviting. Scene 3. The performance. My phone buzzed again. A text from Bella to the cousins-only group chat. Is this a prank? Uncle Glenn just offered us tap water in solo cups. He says he is saving the good stuff for later. I almost laughed out loud in the hotel lobby. It was a hysterical, desperate laugh. Glenn was improvising. He was trying to play the role of the relaxed host. He was probably waving his hands around, saying things like, "We are keeping it casual until everyone settles in," or, "Let's just enjoy the company first," right? He was moving things around on the counter, straightening stacks of magazines, fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing. It was the behavior of a man who looked busy to avoid being asked why he wasn't effective. He was offering water because he didn't know how to work the fancy espresso machine I had installed for him, and he couldn't find the wine opener. Scene 4. The whispers. The confusion was shifting into suspicion. I could feel the temperature in the room dropping. Aunt Janice would be in overdrive. She was the vice president of image maintenance. She would be moving from group to group, whispering, patting arms, trying to lower the volume of the questions. "Shh, don't worry," she would be hissing. "Lucy is just running a little behind. You know how she is. Always a perfectionist. She probably went to get something extra special." But the more she tried to cover it, the more obvious the hole became. You cannot cover the absence of an entire event with a smile. Then, the inevitable happened. The upscale promise came back to haunt him. I received a text from Mike. Uncle Bob just asked for that $200 Cabernet Uncle Glenn posted on Facebook last week. Glenn looks like he's going to throw up. I leaned my head against the cool wall of the lobby. I remembered that Facebook post. Glenn had taken a photo of a bottle of wine at a liquor store, a bottle he didn't buy, and captioned it, "Stocking up for the family, only the best for my crew." Now, Bob was standing there, likely holding an empty plastic cup, asking for the goods. "It is breathing," Glenn would lie. "It needs to decant." "Where is it?" Bob would press. "I will open it." "It is in the cellar," Glenn would stammer. There was no cellar. There was a crawl space with a broken sump pump. The realization was dawning on them. The Emperor wasn't just naked. He was broke and hungry. Scene 5. The social media leak. Then came the notification that made my stomach clench. Instagram. Bella had posted a story. I opened it. It was a short video. Panning across the living room, it showed the empty table, the confused relatives standing in their coats, and Glenn in the background frantically looking through a drawer, presumably for a napkin. The caption read, "Christmas prep chaos at the Howards, 6 p.m., and no dinner. Guess we are ordering pizza. LOL. Family drama. Starving." It wasn't malicious. Bella was 19. To her, everything was content. But to Glenn, to the Howard family legacy. This was a nuclear bomb. This was public confirmation that the perfect family gathering was a sham. The LOL at the end was the sharpest knife. It reduced Glenn's grand upscale vision to a joke, a meme. Scene 6. The delusion. Then, a text from the man himself. "Dad. I know you are watching. Stop this immediately. Everyone is asking for you. I told them you are just being dramatic and you went to get ice. Get back here in 20 minutes and I will forgive this stunt." I stared at the words, "I will forgive this stunt." He still didn't get it. He was standing in the wreckage of his own expectations, surrounded by 30 hungry people, and he still believed he was the one with the power to offer forgiveness. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought my no was a fluctuating currency that could be devalued if he pressured me enough. He didn't understand that I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't playing a game. I was simply absent. And his inability to function without me wasn't my stunt. It was his reality. I looked at the phone in my hand. The chaos was swirling, but I was standing still. I was 3 hours away. I was in a room with a locked door. I had a book in my bag and a bottle of water I had bought with my own money. I was safe, but the voice on the other end of the line was still waiting. I brought the phone back to my ear. The chaos of the texts faded into the background as the sharp, clear voice of Marissa Lane cut through the noise. "Lucy," she said. "Are you still there, Marissa Lane, my cousin's mother-in-law, a woman who ran a corporate HR department with an iron fist? She was the one relative who terrified Glenn because she could smell incompetence from a mile away. She was the one who had critiqued the roast beef last year. She was the audience Glenn was performing for." "I am here, Marissa," I said. "Good," she said. There was no panic in her voice. No, "Please come back." It was the cool, collected tone of a woman who was looking at a crime scene and trying to identify the perpetrator. "I am currently looking at your father," Marissa said. "He is telling everyone that you stormed out because you were overwhelmed and that you left him in the lurch. He is painting a very vivid picture of a hysterical daughter abandoning her loving family." I closed my eyes. Of course he was. That was the script. "I see," I said. "I don't think that is true." Marissa continued. "I am looking at this kitchen. It is not messy. It is empty. There is a difference. A hysterical person leaves a mess. A calculated person leaves a blank slate." She paused. "Lucy, where are you?" "I am at a hotel," I said. "In Harbor Point." "You are not coming back tonight." "No." "And the food, the prime rib, the wine?" "I have it," I said. Well, I have the parts I paid for." "I see," Marissa said again. Her voice dropped lower, becoming more intimate, more urgent. "Then I need to ask you something, right now, and I need the truth. Lucy, no covering for him, no family loyalty nonsense. I need the numbers." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Marissa said, her voice hard as flint. "Everyone in this room thinks Glenn is the benefactor of this feast. Everyone thinks he is the generous patriarch who showers us with luxury. But looking at this empty refrigerator, and looking at the panic in his eyes when I asked him where the napkins were, I am starting to suspect we have been thanking the wrong person for a decade." She took a breath. "So tell me, Lucy, who pays for Christmas? And don't you dare lie to me." The question hung in the air between us, vibrating with the potential to destroy everything. It was the question I had been waiting for someone to ask for 10 years. I stood in the hotel lobby, the fire crackling nearby. I thought about the bank statements in my laptop. I thought about the texts from Glenn demanding I return to save his image. I thought about Bella's Instagram story. I took a deep breath. "Do you want the short answer or the long answer?" I asked. "I want the accounting," Marissa said. "I am putting you on speakerphone. I am in the pantry. It is just me right now, but I want to know before I go out there and listen to another word of his fiction." "Okay," I said. "I will tell you." The question Marissa Lane asked me was not the one I had braced myself for. I had expected an interrogation about my whereabouts. I had expected a lecture on duty, or perhaps a sharp demand to return the assets I had removed from the premises. I was ready to defend my location. I was ready to defend my anger. But Marissa did not ask where I was. She did not ask why I was being difficult. "Lucy," she said, her voice cutting through the static of the poor reception in the pantry. "Are you safe?" I stood frozen in the corner of the Harbor Point Inn lobby. The fire in the stone hearth crackled behind me, a sound of comfort that felt alien in this moment. My hand tightened around the phone, my throat constricted, a sudden, violent reaction to 3 simple words. Are you safe? In 10 years of running the holiday marathon for the Howard family, not one person had ever asked me that. They asked if the turkey was dry. They asked if we had enough ice. They asked if I could drive their kids to the mall. But nobody had ever paused, looked at the dark circles under my eyes or the tremor in my hands, and asked if I was fundamentally okay. "I am safe," I managed to whisper. My voice cracked, betraying the steel facade I was trying to maintain. "I am at a hotel. I am okay." "Good," Marissa said. Her tone remained clinical, detached, like a surgeon assessing a patient's vitals before an operation. "That is the priority. Now that we have established that, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos in the background on her end, the murmur of 30 disappointed voices, the clinking of plastic cups, the high-pitched whine of my cousin's toddler, but Marissa sounded like she was in a soundproof booth. "Your father is currently holding court in the living room," she said. "He is spinning a narrative, Lucy, and it is a very specific one. He is telling everyone that you are having a mental health crisis. He is saying that you are overwhelmed by the pressure of the holidays and that you snapped because he asked you for a little help. He is painting himself as the concerned, baffled father who just wanted a nice family dinner, and you as the unstable daughter who ruined it over a misunderstanding." I felt the heat rise up my neck. It was a familiar heat, the burning sensation of injustice. Glenn was doing what he always did. He was rewriting reality to make himself the victim of his own incompetence. "He is lying," I said. The words came out sharp, slicing through my own hesitation. "I suspected as much," Marissa replied calmly. "Glenn is a man who cares very deeply about appearances, and right now, he looks like a fool. A fool will say anything to stop looking like a fool. But I need the specifics. Lucy, if I am going to stop this train, I need to know exactly what the track looks like." She paused, and I could hear the rustle of a bag. She was likely inspecting the few items left in the pantry. "He says he asked you to help," Marissa said. "He says he just wanted you to coordinate things." "He didn't ask," I said. I spoke clearly, projecting my voice into the receiver as if I were giving testimony. "He didn't ask me for a favor. Marissa. He gave me an order. He called me yesterday and gave me a head count of 30 people. He told me it had to be upscale. He told me it had to be perfect. He didn't ask if I had the time. He didn't ask if I had the energy. He just assigned the task like I was a line cook he had hired for the weekend." "I see," Marissa said. "So it was a mandate, not a request." "It was a conscription," I corrected. "And the execution," she pressed. "Glenn implies that he provides the resources and you provide the labor. He is walking around telling people that he spared no expense for this party, but that you failed to organize the delivery." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Spared no expense," I repeated. "That is rich." "Lucy," Marissa said, and her voice dropped an octave, losing the investigative tone and becoming something harder, something more dangerous. "I am looking at this kitchen. It is stripped. I see the generic coffee. I see the lack of spices. I see the empty refrigerator. This is not a house that was prepared for a party. This is a house that was never stocked." She took a breath. "So I am going to ask you the question that nobody in this family seems to want to ask. Who pays for it? Lucy, who usually pays for the prime rib. Who pays for the wine? Who pays for the cleaning crew that Glenn claims missed their slot today?" I looked out the window of the lobby. The snow was falling softly on the empty street. I thought about the spreadsheet on my laptop. I thought about the 5 years of bank statements I had reviewed last night. I thought about the thousands of dollars that had vanished from my life to buy Glenn's reputation. I could have lied. I could have protected him. I could have said we split it. I could have said he paid me back in cash. That was the old Lucy. That was the daughter who smoothed the edges so nobody would get cut. But the old Lucy was gone. She had been left behind in the freezing parking lot of the Riverton Care Alliance. "I do," I said. I didn't shout it. I didn't cry. I said it with the flat, undeniable weight of a fact. "I pay for everything. Marissa, the food, the alcohol, the decorations, the cleaning service, the linens. I buy the groceries. I cook the food, I serve it, and then I clean it up. Glenn doesn't pay for the party. He just hosts the location." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It was the silence of a judge reviewing evidence that changes the entire verdict of a case. Everything, Marissa asked. The wine last year, the $200 bottles he bragged about. I bought them at the wine cellar on 5th Street. I said, "You can check my credit card statement if you want." He asked for them specifically, but he forgot his wallet when we went to the store, just like he forgets his wallet every year. "And this year," she asked, "did he contribute anything for these 30 people?" "He bought a bottle of generic vodka and a box of saltines," I said, "and he provided the electricity. That is his contribution." "I see," Marissa said. Her voice was ice cold now. It was the voice she used when she was firing an executive who had been embezzling company funds. "So, essentially, we have all been guests at your table for a decade, but we have been thanking the waiter instead of the chef." "I suppose so," I said. "And he knows this?" Marissa asked. "He knows you are the financial engine." "He knows," I said. "He just chooses to call it family contribution so he doesn't have to write a check." "Unbelievable," Marissa murmured. "He is out there right now. Lucy, he is holding a glass of tap water and telling your Aunt Janice that you are going through a phase and that he is so worried about your spending habits. He actually said that. He said he thinks you are having financial trouble and that is why you are acting out." The audacity of it took my breath away. He was projecting his own financial leeching onto me. He was using my financial abuse as the cover story for his own stinginess. "Marissa," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I can't go back there. I can't walk into that room and fight him. He will just talk over me. He will make me look crazy." "You are not coming back," Marissa said firmly. "Do not get in your car. Do not drive down here. You are safe where you are." "But what are you going to do?" I asked. "If you say something, he will just deny it. He will say I am lying." "He can't deny arithmetic," Marissa said, "and he can't deny an empty refrigerator." "Please don't make a scene," I said, the reflex kicking in again. "I don't want to ruin Christmas for the kids. I don't want everyone to be uncomfortable." "Lucy," Marissa cut me off, "listen to me. You are not ruining anything. The ruin is already here. It is standing in the living room wearing a red cashmere sweater. You have spent 10 years protecting this family from the truth of who your father is. You have subsidized his ego with your own life. That stops today. But, no buts," she said. "You have resigned. Remember, you are not the manager anymore. I am the manager now, and I am about to conduct a performance review." "What are you going to do?" I asked again, fear and anticipation warring in my chest. "I am going to go out there," Marissa said, "and I am going to ask him a very simple question. I am going to ask him, in front of your Aunt Janice, in front of your cousins, in front of the entire Lane family, where the receipt for the prime rib is. I am going to ask him to show me the transaction." "He won't have it," I whispered. "Exactly," Marissa said, "and when he can't produce it, I am going to ask him why he invited 30 people to a dinner he couldn't afford to pay for. I am going to stop him from rewriting the reality. Lucy, he doesn't get to be the victim tonight. He has to be the volunteer." "He will hate me," I said. "He already resents you," Marissa corrected. "There is a difference. He resents you because he needs you. After tonight, he might hate you because you exposed him, but at least it will be an honest hatred, and you will be free." She paused. "Stay at the hotel. Lucy, order room service. Watch a movie. Turn your phone off if you want. But do not come here. Do not save him. If you save him now, you will be saving him for the rest of your life. Let him fall. It is the only way he learns that gravity exists." "Okay," I said. "Thank you. Marissa." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just send me the bill for the wine next time." The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. My hand was sweating. I felt lightheaded, as if I had just run a sprint. I walked over to a leather armchair in the lobby and sat down. I couldn't move. I couldn't go up to my room. I was suspended in the moment, waiting for the shockwave to travel from Hollow Creek to Harbor Point. I stared at my phone screen. It was dark. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. I imagined Marissa walking out of the pantry. I imagined the click of her heels on the hardwood floor. I imagined the way the room would quiet down when she entered, because Marissa Lane commanded attention without trying. I imagined Glenn smiling at her, raising his plastic cup, expecting her to join in the commiseration about his difficult daughter. I imagined her stopping in the center of the room. I imagined her clearing her throat. 3 minutes passed. My phone vibrated. It wasn't a call. It was a text. It was from my cousin Mike. I picked it up. My fingers trembling, I opened the message. Mike Holy. Shit. I waited. The 3 dots appeared. They danced on the screen for what felt like an eternity. Mike Marissa just walked into the living room. She didn't even yell. She just asked Glenn, loud enough for everyone to hear. Glenn, looking at this empty kitchen, I am confused. Who exactly pays for the food every year? Because it clearly isn't you. I held my breath. Another message popped up. Mike. The room is dead silent. You can hear a pin drop. Aunt Janice looks like she is going to faint. And Dad. I stared at the screen, waiting for the verdict. Mike, Dad, is standing there like he has been nailed to the floor. He is bright red. He tried to laugh it off, but Marissa just stared him down and asked, Did Lucy buy the wine last year too? He isn't answering. Dude, he is cooked. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. It was a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to empty my lungs of 10 years of accumulated dust. He was cooked. The truth was out. It wasn't my truth anymore. It wasn't a secret I was hoarding in a dark corner of my heart. It was public property. It was sitting on the coffee table in Hollow Creek. Undeniable and ugly and real. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the crazy daughter. I was just the bank that had finally closed its doors. I looked at the fire crackling in the lobby. For the first time all day, I felt warm. Not the feverish warmth of anxiety, but the steady, solid warmth of validation. I stood up. I didn't need to see the rest of the text thread. I knew how it would end. The denial, the sputtering, the eventual, humiliating silence. I walked to the front desk. The receptionist looked up. Can I help you? She asked. Yes, I said. I would like to order room service. Do you have a menu? Sure, she said, handing me a laminated sheet. What are you in the mood for? I looked at the menu. Burgers, salads, pizza. I will take the burger, I said. And a glass of your best Cabernet. And please, put it on my tab. You got it, she said. I walked toward the elevator. I was going to eat a burger alone in a hotel room on Christmas Eve. There would be no prime rib. There would be no crystal glasses. There would be no perfection. But I would be paying for it with my own money, and I would be eating it in peace. And that, I realized as the elevator doors slid shut, was the most upscale Christmas I could possibly imagine. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, a half-eaten burger on the nightstand, and a glass of mediocre Cabernet in my hand. The room was silent, but the world inside my phone was screaming. It was not a chaotic scream anymore. It was the precise, surgical dismantling of a myth that had stood for 10 years. I wasn't in the room at Hollow Creek, but I didn't need to be. Through the flurry of texts from Mike, the updates from Bella, and the eventual, shell-shocked phone call from Aunt Janice later that evening, I saw the scene unfold with more clarity than if I had been standing next to the fireplace. It was a courtroom drama played out in a suburban living room, where the judge wore a silk blouse and the defendant wore a red cashmere sweater that he likely hadn't paid to dry clean. According to Mike, the silence that followed Marissa's initial question, who pays for the food, was not just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that sucked the oxygen out of the room, leaving 30 people gasping for a comfortable lie that wasn't there anymore. Glenn tried to pivot. He tried to laugh it off. Marissa, please, he had said, waving a hand dismissively. We are talking about logistics. It doesn't matter who swipes the card. It is a family effort. Lucy handles the details. I handle the overview. The overview, Marissa repeated, her voice flat. Does the overview cost money? Glenn, because the prime rib costs money, the wine costs money, the cleaning crew costs money. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply stood in the center of the living room, illuminated by the recessed lighting I had installed 3 years ago, and refused to let the moment pass. I asked a simple question, she continued. Did you pay for this party? Did you pay for last year's party? Or the year before? The room waited. My cousins, my uncles, the distant relatives from Ohio. They all watched Glenn. For years, they had seen him as the benevolent patriarch, the successful man who graciously opened his home and showered them with abundance. They had eaten the shrimp cocktails and praised his generosity. They had drunk the expensive scotch and toasted his success. Glenn looked around the room, his eyes darting from face to face, looking for an ally. He looked for someone who would jump in and say, "Oh, stop it. It doesn't matter. Let's just order pizza." He looked at Aunt Janice. Janice was his sister. She was his eternal defender. She was the one who had called me on the highway, begging me to come back and save him. If anyone was going to throw herself on the grenade to protect Glenn's ego, it was Janice. But something had shifted. Perhaps it was the sheer, undeniable emptiness of the kitchen. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of 30 years of making excuses. Or perhaps, for the first time, the social math didn't add up in her favor. Janice cleared her throat. She didn't look at Glenn. She looked at her hands, which were twisting a paper napkin into a tight spiral. "He didn't pay," Janice said softly. The whisper was louder than a shout. "What did you say, Janice?" Marissa asked, turning her gaze to the sofa. Janice looked up, her face flushed with a mixture of shame and defiance. "I said, he didn't pay. I knew it. I have known it for a while." This was the twist that made me put down my wine glass in the hotel room. Janice knew. "I saw Lucy at the grocery store 3 years ago," Janice continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. "She had 2 carts full of food. The bill was over $600. I saw her use her own debit card. I saw her check her balance on her phone afterward and look scared." "And you said nothing?" Marissa asked. "I thought," Janice stammered, "I thought maybe Glenn paid her back later. I wanted to believe that. It was easier to believe that. We pretended not to see it." We pretended not to see it. That sentence hit me hard. It wasn't just Glenn. It was a conspiracy of convenience. The entire family had watched me drown in debt and labor, and they had looked away because the food was good and the venue was free. They had accepted the perfect Christmas, because questioning it would mean they might have to chip in. Suddenly, the floodgates opened. The illusion of Glenn Howard, the generous host, began to dissolve in real time. Uncle Bob spoke up from the corner. He was holding the empty plastic cup that Glenn had handed him earlier. "Wait a minute," Bob said, frowning. "Last year, the vintage Bordeaux. Glenn, you made a whole speech about it. You said you had been saving it in your collection for a special occasion. You walked around the table pouring it like you were a sommelier." Bob looked at Marissa. "Did he buy that?" Marissa looked at the text history on her phone, the one where I had confirmed the purchase. "No," Marissa said. "Lucy bought it. She bought it at the wine cellar on 5th Street. Glenn forgot his wallet, just like he forgets it every year." Bob turned back to Glenn, his expression shifting from confusion to disgust. It wasn't about the money. It was about the theft of credit. It was about the stolen valor of hospitality. "You took credit for her money," Bob said. "You let us toast you with wine your daughter paid for." Glenn was cornered. He was sweating now, the red sweater looking stiflingly hot. "She likes doing it," Glenn burst out. It was a desperate, high-pitched defense. "You don't understand, Lucy. She is intense. She needs to control things. She takes over. I tell her to keep it simple, and she goes overboard. She wants it to be fancy. It makes her feel important. I am just letting her have her moment." I read Mike's transcription of those words on my phone screen, and I felt a cold, sharp clarity. She likes doing it. He had turned my labor into a personality disorder. He had convinced them, and maybe even himself, that my frantic overworking was a neurotic quirk, a hobby I indulged in, rather than a frantic attempt to meet his impossible standards. He had framed my servitude as a favor he was doing for me. Marissa didn't buy it. She didn't blink. "Hosting is a job, Glenn," Marissa said, her voice cutting through his excuses. "Paying the bills is a responsibility. It is not a personality trait, and generosity is not an obligation that you can assign to someone else." She looked around the room, making eye contact with everyone. "We have been eating Lucy's money for a decade," she announced. And we have been clapping for Glenn. That ends tonight." The silence returned. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was final. The verdict had been delivered. The jury had seen the evidence. The Perfect Christmas was officially declared a fraud. Then, the practical reality set in. It was 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve. There were 30 people in a house with no food. "So," my cousin Mike said, breaking the tension, "what are we going to eat?" Glenn opened his mouth, perhaps to suggest something impossible, but Marissa held up a hand. "Sit down, Glenn," she ordered. He sat. He actually sat down on the ottoman, deflated, stripped of his authority. "We are ordering pizza," Marissa said, "and we are splitting the bill. Everyone gets their phone out, Venmo or cash." And that is exactly what happened. Mike sent me a picture an hour later. It was a photo of the dining room table, the same table Glenn had demanded be magazine perfect. There were no linen tablecloths. There were no silver chargers. There were no crystal wine glasses. Instead, the table was covered in grease-stained cardboard boxes from Tony's Pizza Palace. There were stacks of paper plates. There were cans of soda and beer that someone had made a run to the gas station to buy. But the most shocking part of the photo wasn't the mess. It was the faces. People were laughing. Uncle Bob was eating a slice of pepperoni pizza and talking to my cousin Bella. Aunt Janice was sitting on a folding chair, drinking a Diet Coke, looking relaxed for the first time in 20 years. The kids were running around with cheese strings, delighted that they weren't being forced to sit still in scratchy clothes for a 5-course meal they hated. The caption under Mike's photo read, "Honestly, this is the best Christmas Eve we have had in years. No stress, no tension, and the pizza is actually good." I stared at the photo, and a complicated mix of emotions washed over me. On one hand, I felt a profound sense of relief. The sky hadn't fallen. The family hadn't disintegrated because there was no prime rib. The upscale requirement was a lie. The perfect requirement was a lie. We could have been doing this all along. We could have been eating pizza and laughing for the last 10 years. But on the other hand, I felt a deep, aching sadness. I grieved for the years I had lost. I grieved for the thousands of dollars I had spent trying to buy approval that could have been won with a $20 pizza. I grieved for the younger version of myself who thought that love was something you had to cater. My phone buzzed again, a text from my cousin Sarah, the one who usually never texted. Sarah. "Hey Lucy, just wanted to say we get it now. We really get it. Sorry we didn't see it before. Also, this is way more fun than the fancy dinner. Simple is actually nice. Simple is actually nice. I took a bite of my hotel burger. It was lukewarm, but it tasted like freedom. Back at Hollow Creek, the night was winding down, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. The hierarchy had been toppled. Mike texted me one last update for the night. "Mike, people are starting to leave to go to their hotels. Everyone cleaned up their own trash. It took like 5 minutes. Glenn didn't say goodbye to anyone. He just went upstairs about an hour ago and shut his bedroom door." I imagined that moment. I imagined Glenn Howard, the man who lived for the applause, walking up the stairs while his family ate pizza out of boxes. He wasn't storming off in a rage. He wasn't yelling. He was retreating. For the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind the props. He couldn't hide behind the roast or the wine or the frantic daughter in the kitchen. He had been forced to look in the mirror, and the reflection showed a man who had brought nothing to the table but demands. He closed the door. It wasn't a victory for me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had beaten him. I felt like I had finally resigned from a job I never should have taken. I finished my wine. I put the room service tray in the hall. I turned off the light in my hotel room. The bed was comfortable. The sheets were clean. And for the first time in a decade, on the night before Christmas, my mind was quiet. I didn't have to worry about the turkey. I didn't have to worry about the timing of the sides. I closed my eyes, and I slept. I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who has finally put down a heavy load. The house at Hollow Creek was no longer my burden to carry. It was just a house, and I was just Lucy. I drove back to Hollow Creek on the morning of December 27th. The roads were clear. The black ice melted into a harmless gray slush that splattered against my windshield. I wasn't gripping the steering wheel with the white-knuckled desperation that usually defined my trips to my father's house. My heart wasn't racing. My mind wasn't cataloging a list of chores I was already late for. I felt strangely like a tourist visiting a landmark I had read about, but never actually seen with my own eyes. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always did, stately. Brick, imposing against the winter sky. But the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time in a decade, I didn't have a key to the back door in my hand. I didn't have a car trunk full of groceries. I walked to the front door and rang the bell. It took a minute. Glenn opened the door. He wasn't wearing the red cashmere sweater. He was wearing an old flannel shirt and sweatpants. He looked tired, not the exhausted from hosting kind of tired, which is usually accompanied by a smug sense of accomplishment. He looked deflated. He looked like a balloon that had been sitting in a corner for 3 days, slowly losing its helium. "Hi, Dad," I said. He looked at me, then stepped back to let me in. "You are back." "I am visiting," I corrected him gently. I stepped inside. The sensory experience was immediate and jarring. Usually, on the 27th, the house would be spotless. I would have spent the previous day doing the post-holiday deep clean vacuuming pine needles, scrubbing wine stains out of the carpet, washing 3 loads of linen. Today, the house smelled of stale pepperoni and cardboard. I walked into the living room. The pizza boxes from Christmas Eve were still stacked on the coffee table. There were empty soda cans on the side tables. A few paper plates were scattered on the floor where the kids had been sitting. It wasn't filthy. It wasn't a health hazard, but it was lived in. It was messy. It was real. It was the house of a 65-year-old bachelor who didn't have a live-in maid. I felt a twitch in my fingers. The fixer instinct. My body wanted to grab a trash bag. My eyes started mapping the most efficient route to clear the table. I shoved my hands into my coat pockets and kept them there. "Coffee?" Glenn asked. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a mug. "Sure," I said. I followed him into the kitchen. The counter was still bare, save for the generic instant coffee jar I had left for him. He poured hot water from the kettle into a mug and handed it to me. No frothed milk, no freshly ground beans, just black, bitter water. I took a sip. It tasted fine. We sat at the small breakfast table. The silence wasn't the heavy, loaded silence of the phone calls. It was the awkward silence of 2 people who had to learn how to speak to each other all over again. Glenn broke it first. He couldn't help himself. "Marissa really enjoyed herself," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She acted like she was prosecuting a murder trial." "She asked a question, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "She made it sound like I was taking advantage of you," Glenn muttered, looking down into his coffee. "Humiliating me in front of Bob and the kids, acting like I'm some kind of parasite." I put my mug down. I didn't look away. "You did take advantage of me," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, as neutral as saying the sky is blue or water is wet. Glenn's head snapped up. "I never—" "Dad," I interrupted, raising a hand. "Stop. We are not doing the revisionist history thing today. I am not here to fight, but I am not here to pretend, either." I leaned forward. "You called me 2 days before Christmas and ordered me to feed 30 people. You didn't offer money. You didn't offer help. You assumed I would pay for the food, the wine, and the decor, just like I have for 5 years. You assumed I would use my vacation days to scrub your toilets. You assumed I would act as your staff so you could play the Lord of the Manor." Glenn looked away, his jaw working. "I just thought you liked it. You always seemed so organized. You have your lists. You take charge. I thought it was your thing." "My thing is not being broke," I said. "My thing is not being exhausted." "I got used to it," he admitted. The words came out quiet, almost grudging. "You handled it. It was easy. I didn't think about the details because I knew you had them covered." "Getting used to something doesn't make it right," I said. "You can get used to a leaky roof, too, but that doesn't mean the water isn't rotting the floorboards." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't an invoice. It was the new Constitution. "We need to talk about the future," I said, "because I am not doing this again, not the old way." Glenn looked at the paper, then at me. "So that is it. No more Christmas. We just sit here in the dark next year." "No," I said. "We have Christmas, but we have a real Christmas." What does that mean? It means the Bank of Lucy is closed, I said. Permanently? I started listing the points, ticking them off on my fingers. 1. The guest list. You don't get to invite 30 people without consulting me first. If you want a reunion, we discuss it in July, not December. Glenn nodded slowly. He didn't argue. 2. The budget. If you want upscale, you pay for upscale. If you want prime rib, you give me your credit card before I go to the butcher. If you want expensive wine, you buy it yourself. I will not spend a single dollar of my salary on hosting your party. I will bring a dish, like a guest. I will bring a gift, like a guest. But I am not the sponsor. 3. The labor. I am canceling the cleaning service permanently. If you want the house clean, you clean it, or you hire someone with your own money. I am not scrubbing your grout anymore. Glenn winced at that one. The reality of the dirty pizza boxes in the living room was probably making this point very vivid for him. And 4, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. We stop pretending. No more perfect. If we can only afford pizza, we eat pizza. If we can only manage a potluck, we do a potluck. But we don't lie about who is doing the work. Glenn sat in silence for a long time. The refrigerator hummed in the background, the empty, honest refrigerator. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The bravado that usually armored him was gone, stripped away by the public undressing Marissa had given him. And if I can't do it, he asked. The question was so quiet, I almost missed it. I looked at him. What? If I can't do it, he repeated, looking up at me with eyes that were suddenly very vulnerable. Lucy, I don't know how to cook a turkey. I don't know how to organize 30 people. I don't know what wine goes with what. Your mother, she did all that, and then you did it. It was the first time he had mentioned Mom in years without using her memory as a weapon to guilt me. This was different. This was a confession of incompetence. I am just not good at this, he said. I wanted it to be nice. I wanted everyone to think I was doing okay. If I have to do it myself, it will be a disaster. I felt a pang of sympathy. It was genuine, but it was distant. It wasn't the overwhelming urge to rescue him that used to hijack my brain. It was the sympathy you feel for an adult who has to learn a hard lesson. Then let it be a disaster, I said gently. Or let it be simple. You don't have to be Martha Stewart, Dad. You just have to be a father. Pizza was okay, he mumbled. Bob seemed to like it. Bob loved it, I said, because he got to talk to you, instead of watching you run around pretending to be a waiter. And the kids liked the paper plates, Glenn added, a small, sheepish smile touching his lips. Less noise. Exactly. I took a deep breath. You aren't helpless. Dad, you ran a business for 20 years. You can order a catering tray. You can tell people to bring a salad. You just don't want to because you think it looks cheap. But let me tell you what looks cheap, your daughter resentfully spending her savings to make you look rich. He flinched, but he nodded. Yeah, Marissa made that pretty clear. He traced the rim of his coffee mug. So, next year, potluck. Potluck, I agreed. And I will make the dessert. Only the dessert. Okay, he said. Okay. He looked at the clock on the stove. It was 5:30 in the evening. The winter sun had already set, and the kitchen was getting dark. Are you staying for dinner? He asked. He sounded hesitant, like he was asking a girl out on a date he was sure she would refuse. I looked at the stove. It was cold. I looked at the pantry. I knew exactly what was in there, nothing. If I stayed, the old pattern would be to say, let me whip something up. I would look in the freezer, find some frozen chicken, make a sauce from scratch, boil some pasta, and have a meal on the table in 40 minutes. I would wash the dishes afterward while he watched TV. I am hungry, I said. Glenn looked hopeful. He started to stand up. I think there is some pasta in the cupboard, and maybe a can of... No, I said. He froze. I am not cooking. Dad, I said. I am a guest, remember? He sank back into his chair. Right, the rules. But, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket, I am happy to split a takeout order with you. There is that Thai place in town that delivers. Glenn looked at me. He looked at the stove, then back at me. He seemed to be weighing the options. He could be stubborn, eat toast alone, and maintain his pride. Or he could accept the new reality, pay his share, and have dinner with his daughter. "I like the pad thai," he said quietly. "Chicken or shrimp?" I asked, opening the app. "Shrimp, extra peanut sauce." "That is $18, I said, not looking up from the screen. "And the delivery fee is $5. Glenn didn't bristle. He didn't make a joke about me being stingy. He reached into his back pocket, he had his wallet this time, and pulled out a $20 bill. He placed it on the table. "Is that enough?" "It is perfect," I said. I placed the order. While we waited for the food, I didn't get up to clean the living room. I didn't gather the pizza boxes. I didn't wipe down the counters. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. I pushed a pizza box aside with my foot to make room for my legs. Glenn followed me in and sat in his recliner. "The game is on," he said, picking up the remote. "Who is playing?" I asked. "Lions," he said. We watched the game. The house was messy. The floor was sticky in one spot where soda had spilled. The Christmas tree corner was empty, but as I sat there, listening to the commentators drone on, I realized something profound. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't resentful. I wasn't calculating how much debt I had accrued in the last 48 hours. I was just sitting. When the doorbell rang 30 minutes later, Glenn started to look at me. Then he stopped. He remembered. He stood up. He walked to the door. He paid the driver. He brought the food into the kitchen. He got the plates. He got the forks. He brought my plate to me on the sofa. "Here," he said. "Extra peanut sauce." "Thanks, Dad," I said. I took the plate. I didn't say. "You shouldn't have." I didn't say. "Let me get that." I just took it. We ate in front of the TV, amidst the wreckage of the imperfect Christmas. It was the best meal I had ever had in that house, and the best part was, I knew exactly how much it cost, and I knew exactly who had paid for it. It was the second week of January when the summons came. Glenn sent a group email to the family unusual for him, as he preferred the telephone where he could interrupt you inviting everyone who was still local, along with the core family members, to a post-holiday debrief at Aunt Janice's house. The subject line read, "Planning for next year." Most of the cousins texted me immediately. "Is this a trap?" Mike asked. "Is he going to try to bill us for the pizza?" Bella joked. But I knew what it was. It was Glenn's attempt to regain control of the narrative. He wanted to sit us all down, smooth over the misunderstanding of Christmas Eve, and perhaps subtly shift the blame back onto my unpredictable nature, so that by next December, the status quo could be restored. He wanted to reset the board so he could play the king again. I arrived at Aunt Janice's house 10 minutes late. I did this on purpose. I wanted to walk into a room that was already seated. I wanted to be an attendee, not an organizer. When I entered the living room, the atmosphere was stiff. Glenn was sitting in the armchair, wearing a blazer, looking like he was about to chair a board meeting. Janice was fluttering around nervously with a plate of cookies. Marissa Lane was there, sitting with her spine straight, looking like the prosecutor she was at heart. "Lucy," Glenn said, nodding at me. "Glad you could make it. We were just discussing how to avoid the confusion of this year." I sat down on the sofa next to Mike. "I don't think there was any confusion. Dad, I think it was the clearest Christmas we have ever had." Glenn cleared his throat. "Well, yes, but obviously, we can't have a repeat of the lack of preparation, so I wanted to go over the expectations for next year, so everyone knows their role." He was doing it again. He was trying to assign roles. He was trying to rebuild the stage. I reached into my bag. "I agree," I said calmly. "We need to be very clear about roles, and more importantly, we need to be clear about costs." I pulled out a stack of paper. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a printed spreadsheet, color-coded, detailing the expenditures of December for the last 5 years. I had spent the last 2 nights compiling it, pulling every credit card statement, every receipt, every withdrawal. I didn't throw them on the table. I passed them out. One to Glenn, one to Janice, one to Marissa, and one to Uncle Bob. "What is this?" Glenn asked, squinting at the paper. "This is the cost of perfection," I said. The room went silent as they looked at the numbers. I hadn't inflated anything. I hadn't added a salary for my labor. This was just raw materials. Year 1, $850. Year 2, $1,240. Year 3, $1,800. Year 4, $2,150. Year 5, $2,600. At the bottom, the total sum was bolded, $8,640. This is what I have spent, I said, my voice steady. This is not family money. This is not Glenn's budget. This is money from my personal savings account. This is the price of the prime rib, the wine, the flowers, the linens, and the professional cleaning crew that I hired because Dad told me the house wasn't clean enough. I looked at my father. He was staring at the paper, his face draining of color. He knew I paid for things, but seeing the aggregate number, seeing the price of a used car printed in black and white, was different than ignoring a grocery receipt. Marissa looked up from the sheet. She took off her reading glasses. "Glenn," she said. Her voice was quiet. Dangerous. Glenn didn't look up. "Glenn," Marissa repeated, "I am looking at this figure, $8,000. Did you reimburse her for any of this?" The silence that followed was excruciating. It was the sound of a man's ego dying in real time. He couldn't lie. Not with the paper in front of him. Not with Marissa staring at him. Glenn started, his voice cracking. I handled the utilities and the house. Did you write her a check?" Marissa asked. "Yes or no?" Glenn looked at his hands. "No." "So," Marissa said, turning to the room, "we haven't just been guests. We have been thieves. We have been letting a hospital administrator with student loans subsidize the holidays for people who own boats and vacation homes." She let that sink in. Then, a movement from the sofa. Aunt Janice stood up. Janice, the peacemaker. Janice, who always told me to be the bigger person. She looked at the spreadsheet. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were full of tears. "I am sorry," Janice said. It wasn't the brush-off apology I expected. It wasn't, "I am sorry you feel that way." "I knew," Janice said, her voice trembling. "I knew you were spending too much. I saw you stressed. I saw you tired. But every time I thought about saying something, I stopped myself because if you didn't do it, I was afraid I would have to, or I was afraid Glenn would yell. So I used the word family like a weapon. I told you to do it for the family because it was easier than standing up for you." She walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "I am so sorry. Lucy, you were drowning, and I was cheering for you to swim harder." I felt a lump in my throat. That was all I had ever wanted. I didn't want the money back as much as I wanted the acknowledgement. "Thank you, Aunt Janice," I whispered. The tension in the room broke, replaced by a collective sense of shame and resolve. "Okay," Cousin Mike said, clapping his hands together. "New rules. We are not doing this again." He grabbed a notepad from the coffee table. "Rule number 1, Mike said. Potluck. Nobody, and I mean nobody, cooks for 30 people alone. We use a spreadsheet. You sign up for a dish. If you don't bring it, you don't eat." "Agreed," Uncle Bob said. "And a budget cap. No more upscale nonsense. We are eating food, not gold leaf. If the host wants something fancy, the host pays for it, alone. And the host rotates," Bella added. "Why is it always at Uncle Glenn's? We have houses too. Let's rotate so nobody has to clean every year." "No," Glenn spoke up. We all turned to him. He was still holding the spreadsheet, his knuckles white. "I want it at the house," Glenn said softly. "It is the family house. It is where your mother, it is where we have always been." He looked up at me. His eyes were red. "But I was wrong," he said. He didn't mumble it. He said it clearly, looking me in the eye in front of his sister, his in-laws, and his nephews. "I wanted the credit," Glenn said. "I wanted to look like the big man. I wanted everyone to envy my life and my perfect Christmas, and I let you pay for my vanity. Lucy, I treated you like an employee because I was too cheap to hire one and too lazy to do the work myself." He took a deep breath. "I expected you to be your mother," he admitted. "But your mother never did it alone either. I helped her. I forgot that part. I conveniently forgot that part." He stood up and walked over to me. He reached into his pocket. For a second, I thought he was going to pull out a checkbook. But he pulled out a key ring. It was his spare house key. The one I had carried for 10 years. The one that symbolized my obligation to arrive early, to leave late, to check on the pipes, to fill the fridge. He held it out to me. "I want this back," he said. I stared at the key. "You are taking my key." "No," Glenn said. "I am taking back the expectation. You shouldn't have a key that you only use to come over and work. You are my daughter. Lucy, you are not the property manager. You are not the caterer. You are a guest in my home." He placed the key on the table between us. "If you come over," he said, "I want you to knock. I want to open the door for you. I want to take your coat. I want to serve you a drink. I want to be your father, not your boss." I looked at the key on the table. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off my chest. He wasn't locking me out. He was releasing me. "And," Glenn added, pulling out his checkbook now, "I can't pay $8,000 today. You know I don't have that kind of cash liquid, but I'm going to write you a check for $2,000 now, and I will pay you $500 a month until it is squared. I am not letting you pay for my memories." I looked at him. I could see the pride it cost him to say that. I could see the embarrassment. But for the first time, I respected him. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Thank you." I didn't refuse the money. That would have been the old Lucy, trying to be a martyr. The new Lucy took the check, because the new Lucy knew that accountability is a form of love. "One condition," I said, folding the check. "I am still not cooking the turkey next year." Glenn managed a weak smile. "Deal. I will figure it out." Fast forward 11 months. It was December 25th, the location Lake Briar. But not the Lake Briar of my nightmares. The house was full, but it felt different. There were fewer people, about 15 of us. The rest had gone to other in-laws or stayed home, and that was fine. The world didn't end because the crowd was smaller. The table was not set with linen. It was covered in a mishmash of serving dishes. There was a green bean casserole from Aunt Janice, which was slightly burnt. There was a store-bought ham from Uncle Bob. There was a salad from Mike. And in the kitchen, Glenn Howard was wearing an apron. "Okay," he was saying, squinting at a recipe card he had printed out from the internet. "It says, 'Fold in the cheese.' How do you fold cheese? It is not a towel. You just stir it gently." "Dad," I said. I was sitting on a bar stool, holding a glass of wine. I was wearing a velvet dress. I was not sweating. I was not wearing an apron. "Stir it," Glenn muttered. Right. He was making scalloped potatoes. He had been talking about them for weeks. He was terrified. He pulled the dish out of the oven 20 minutes later. The top was a little too brown. The sauce was a little too runny. It looked nothing like the magazine photos he used to demand. He placed it on the table with shaking hands. "It might be terrible," he announced to the room, "but I made it." Marissa Lane took the first scoop. She tasted it. We all watched her. "It is crunchy," she said. "It is undercooked," Glenn groaned, putting his head in his hands. "It is edible," Mike said, taking a huge bite. "And it is hot. Good job." "Uncle Glenn?" Everyone laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a warm, forgiving laugh. It was the sound of a family that had stopped trying to be a performance and started trying to be a family. I looked at my father. He was laughing too. His face red, but he looked happy. He looked present. He wasn't standing at the head of the table waiting for applause. He was sitting in the middle of the mess, eating his undercooked potatoes. And he looked more like a patriarch now than he ever had when he was barking orders. I took a sip of my wine. It was a $20 bottle I had brought. It tasted fantastic. The perfect Christmas was dead. It had been buried in a snowdrift in Harbor Point, and in its place, something better had grown, something messy, and loud, and fair. I looked at Glenn. He caught my eye. He raised his glass to me. "Merry Christmas, Lucy," he mouthed across the table. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I said. I didn't have to make him look good anymore. He was doing just fine looking human. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Lucy's journey resonated with you, especially if you have ever felt like the designated fixer in your own family. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a cozy living room in London, a busy commute in New York, or maybe somewhere quiet in Sydney? Please leave a comment below and tell me your location. And if you have ever had to set a hard boundary with your family during the holidays, I read every single comment and I love connecting with you all. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the work. And if you really want to help this story get heard by more people, press that hype button. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay strong and keep your boundaries sharp.